Regardless of peak oil or climate change or any other calamitous disaster you can think of, the system that we live in is fundamentally unethical. It's driven by a logic of accumulation that allows the concentration of wealth, and the requirement for that is a massive concentration of misery for the majority of people on this planet. If we are to move through this system, we have to work towards a more cooperative, collective, communal kind of existence. And we have many models to develop, many models to learn from. But fundamentally, this is about consciousness and promoting human development so that we can all become the people that we strive to be.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and I'm in Eugene, Oregon, with my guests Ravi Logan and Jason Schreiner, who are doing some thinking and action practice around living systems that will be with us, we hope, for a long time. Tell us, start us out. You've written a book. What does it tell us?
It tells us that we need a new paradigm of development. We need a full-scale alternative to neoliberalism, to economic globalism, to the current model of development that's that dominates the planet. I guess that would be the core thesis.
And what is that new paradigm? What is that like?
The major emphasis is on the need for economic decentralization and economic democracy. There needs to be a shift in the locus of economic power from one that is highly centralized to one that is decentralized. There also needs to be a shift in the motivation behind economic development, a shift from a focus around maximization of profit that serves shareholders to a system of development that emphasizes meeting the full range of needs that exist in complex living systems.
So is that a form of decentralized? How's that different from localization, where is that the same kind of thing?
I think they are two separate things in the sense that localization tends to focus only on the locale. It's where you completely separate yourself from a larger system and try to do everything within that community. Whereas a decentralized system tries to, again, it delinks from a large central power, but it recognizes the need that different communities and different regions must work together in some cases at certain kinds of levels. I could give you an example, for instance. For instance, in telecommunications, no single community can provide all its telecommunications needs. There needs to be some kind of system that links between and among different communities. But who's going to administer that system if it's all locales, right? There needs to be some kind of larger scale that can oversee that particular industry.
What I hear you saying is that we're in a globalized village, planet, and we have structures in place like our planetary communications that we don't want to lose. We want to keep that connection.
Not only that, but there are materials that are used in our developed economy that are concentrated in some parts of the planet and not others, whereas all of humanity has need for these materials. So there is need for a certain amount of trade to go on in materials, as well as maintaining these global links of communication and transportation.
I've realized I forgot the title of your book, and what's the basis for it? I forgot to ask that.
The title of the book is PROUT, which is the name of the theory of development that we're articulating.
PROUT.
Which is an acronym for the progressive utilization theory. It's subtitled An Introduction to a Solution-Oriented Model of Development, New Paradigm of Development.
Solution-oriented. Solution-oriented. So we're not just talking theory here, because what I hear you do, you could turn upside down what globalization is doing. Is that part of an aspect of this paradigm shift you're saying we need? In part?
In major part, yes. But globalization is more complex than just economic globalization. Globalization also involves, as Jason was talking about, the globalization of communications and transportation, a globalization of certain facets of culture. So there is a linking together, a kind of planetarization of consciousness that is going on, a growing conception that we are one humanity on one planet. And certain facets of that are, the development is irrepressible. It will move forward. The problematic aspect...
I'm so heartened to hear you say it's irrepressible. Thank you for that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that globalization of consciousness, that we are connected, that we're part of the whole planet, I think that level of compassion that's needed so that we know that the effects of what we're doing here in our consumerist world is really making a difference to people on the other side.
And this is the core value base of this theory.
Okay.
It is grounded in a conception of interdependency, of interrelatedness. And once there is a full recognition of that, then there is an understanding that the welfare of one cannot be separated from the welfare of others, from the welfare of the whole. We need to develop in a way that is equitable and that also maintains a balance with the larger living systems of the world.
That's a key term, is balance, because there's a tendency to want to shut our back or turn our back to globalization as if it's all inherently bad, without realizing some of the many great progressive aspects of it, like cultural exchange, new ideas that come into regions, awareness and consciousness of what's going on in other areas, and how what we do here affects those regions and vice versa. And so rather than turning our back upon this kind of growth of consciousness and this sharing amongst communities, we want to try to balance that with the need to provide our more basic needs in a local level, where we have intimacy with the land, with the water that you're mentioning. And it's also an historical fact that regions traded amongst each other. They would meet on the borders, and you would find materials here that come from Central America, for instance. I mean, so this kind of thing has happened in the past, and it's not turning our backs on that.
Centuries and centuries.
Exactly.
I mean, we wouldn't have pepper and chilies and so on if we hadn't had the
This
spices.
balance can only take place, though, if there is this shift in the locus of economic power from one that is globally centralized to one that resides primarily in local communities and in bioregions.
How do we do this? I mean, it strikes me as, we have a hugely centralized money system, economic system.
Yeah.
Supported by the corporate capitalistic world, yes? How do we shift?
The corporate capitalistic world is the problem. It is the core problem. It is not so simplistic, but it is at the core. And that's where the shift needs to take place. You ask, how do we do it? Fortunately, it is not just we, because this model of development that is the logical extension of corporate capitalism is one that is in fundamental contradiction with the natural world and the balances that are maintained by the natural world. Eventually, there are limits to growth. We're rapidly coming up against them. And in many, we talk about depletion of oil, passing peak. But that has already happened with timber in most places of the world, with fisheries. It's been surpassed now with grain production, with many strategic metals. There is massive deterioration and depletion of the biosystems that support life on the planet. And with global warming, if you layer that on and other things, it's not just us. It is a bigger sphere of life that is going to come crashing down on this out-of-control cancerous growth on the planet.
Cancerous. Growth is that's the key. This is a growth must always keep happening model, right, in our economic system, which keeps eating and eating and eating, and we are now running on this decline.
Share a thought on that.
I think the key term here is cancerous growth. It's not growth that's inherently the problem. If you look around at natural systems, they grow. They live, they develop, they grow, they die, they decay, they return. It's a cyclical kind of process.
Yes.
In a healthy, functioning ecosystem, for instance, which can include people, or maybe not in some cases, but in most cases, yes, a functioning system allows for a system of checks and balances within that system so that it functions properly. And so the type of growth that we want to work towards is one where you have a reciprocity, a kind of balance, where you use that intimate knowledge that people have to see when certain kinds of systems are overloaded, when you need to shift, and what you're producing in that particular time of year, etc. And so I think the key is that we want to find a balanced system of growth, one that allows for natural processes to go through that cycle. And we're a part of natural processes as well.
Now, you listed in those processes that included decay and death, right, and regeneration from those raw materials. The system we have says keep growing bigger, bigger, bigger. There's our cancer, right? But you're talking about learning what the limits are and respecting those.
We're talking about a paradigmatic shift that puts balance at the center. And once there is a sophisticated understanding of how balance evolves within a social, environmental, ecological, economic system, then there is development that occurs that maintains balances. And it may mean certain kinds of understandings of restrictions of the availability of materials, but it may mean shift in the way those materials are utilized. We can do so much more with the materials that we have available to us. There's so many kinds of reuse. There's so many new kinds of technologies that can be brought online. But there is huge irrationalities in corporate globalism.
Well, when profit is the only motive.
When profit is the only motive.
Then that ignores a great deal. It ignores most everything, right?
Yes, yes.
But I want to get back to what you were saying about the money system having to be decentralized. And help me with a picture of that. What does that look like?
The control of the economy needs to be decentralized and democratized. So democratization means that the primary form of enterprise should be cooperative enterprise. Not state-controlled enterprise, not privately controlled enterprise, but that enterprises are owned and controlled by the people. In the present model, capital hires labor. In the model we're proposing, labor hires capital. The workers own and control the enterprise. When they need capital for the development, then they'll issue bonds or they'll take developmental loans from developmental agencies. But that core control of the enterprise is democratically held by the workers. So that is the democratic aspect of the economy that is being envisioned here. Would you like to elaborate on any
a couple
aspect?
other points is that this isn't a communistic kind of system where everything is cooperativized. There's still room for entrepreneurship. In fact, that's a key element. We need to have innovators. We need to have visionaries who come up with ideas, who have an inclination for a particular kind of focus, and to allow them and to empower them to have that focus within the larger community context of cooperation. And furthermore, there are certain key industries we talked about earlier, telecommunications, certain minerals. These need to be administered on a kind of planet-wide basis, some kind of centralized authority that doesn't allow one region to have a kind of dictatorial control over that resource, if that makes sense. So you have kind of tiers. You have some private entrepreneurship where appropriate, and you have some kind of centralized control. But in the mass of basic goods, food, fibers, water, and these kinds of systems, you have cooperative enterprise.
So at the essentials that we need to live are cooperative, democratically owned. Our energy, our water, our food, and probably in some form our land use.
Your staple items, yes. And those staple items should also be primarily produced by the local economy. Your staple foods, your basic building materials, your basic fibers, many of your basic medicines. So much as possible, you want to have self-reliancy of those commodities within the local community.
When you say local, I'm going to make a distinction between locally produced and the local raw materials. Because I can well imagine that if my locality, I'm in the desert, and our homes should be coming from the local rock and sand and so on that originally were.
You want a comprehensive model of decentralization, of localization. So it involves use of and control of local materials. It involves use of a local labor force. It involves production for local markets. You see, all factors involved in that are central to your economy need to have this decentralized focus. And another one that's fundamental is that planning should be decentralized.
Yes. Well, all right, so you have a local area planning. I mean, there's some place where the locals meet. I mean, there's, you know, my locality and your locality. Yeah. So there's got to, I would imagine, some bigger picture here. For example, my locality might decide, you know, town of Eugene might decide, we want to just keep growing out into the farmland because that's not Eugene. You know, it's the county or it's some other part that we don't have jurisdiction over. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine there's got to be some kinds of balances here. So there's some regional oversight.
Yeah, most of the planning would be at a kind of bioregional level, with the understanding that these materials, water, soil, etc., don't just exist in an isolated little area. They flow across. And so that's where you have a kind of bioregional planning. And where you have these little locales like Eugene and other surrounding communities, where they're working cooperative, you have a kind of coordination of that cooperation, if that makes sense, at the regional level.
And you also have coordination then of the bioregions. Those bioregions come together in larger federations of bioregions. So Turtle Island, North America would constitute a federation of
lots of the bioregions.
Much as is emerging, in some ways as is emerging in Europe now. Yeah. You have cultural autonomy, but you have, at areas where it makes sense, you have a federated structure. Though it is problematic there because this is allowing for flow of capital and control to extend across the continent. But except for that, there are many progressive tendencies in what is evolving here. And then you need, as Jason was saying, you need to bring together these federated bioregions into a larger global structure, a confederation.
A different level of governance, right? A different level of production, a different level of finance, a different level of approaching our planet that the old forms are not working.
Yes.
Where does one start? How do we make that kind of change? Certainly, I'm sure it's conceiving of it is the first place. It starts here with our minds, yes, with the ideas. Mm-hmm. How do we begin? It feels like a daunting task.
Conceiving, collectively discussing and developing the network of people who are working with new models, then building models, communicating about models. This is much of what your project is about. Yeah. Right now, this is the core thing. People need to see constructive alternatives.
Yes.
It is not our core task right now to fret about regime change. That is very problematic. I have huge sympathy for all the living beings in the world that are being affected now by those who control power on the planet. But it is not enough just to critique, just to try and bring forward a new administration. There may be some mitigation, some attenuation of the rate of deterioration on the planet, but the same dynamics will be there.
We learned in the corporate world when we worked in it is that you could change who is at the head, you could change the personalities, but the system itself
the system is the problem.
Is running amok.
Yeah.
It's the underlying paradigm that drives that system. It's a logic of accumulation and profit that drives that system. And so no matter who the personnel are, you can shuffle them around all you want, but the institutional structure and logic that drives the system is fundamentally at the core of the problem. And what that ultimately means is that it's a problem of consciousness. Mm-hmm. It's a problem of changing people's perceptions about the world around them, their place within that world, and how they fit within it. And when we can start to change and shift that consciousness, to see our landscapes, to see our cityscapes in a different kind of light, that's when you start to have that light flicker on. And that's why Ravi's mention of models is so vitally important, because that allows people to see, and most importantly, to get their hands dirty, to work in a collective, cooperative kind of fashion, to experience it themselves.
So where are you finding, or what are you doing, to help create some of those models for the rest of us?
You know, we look at it in a... what is the term? There's a term we borrow from permaculture, zone approach, and we stack within each zone. So in permaculture model, there is a system of of zone planning, where you look at what is most intimate to you as being zone 0, and then you move out to things that are further out in your landscape. So that is metaphorical for what we do, but we're looking at zone 0, we are working with development of consciousness. Zone 1, we have a model here of permaculture site development, sustainability training here at this site, which is the base of the Cascadia Commonwealth Institute.
Cascadia Commonwealth Institute.
Right.
Okay, here in Eugene.
Here in Eugene, and there's an acre of land that Jason lives at just down the street that is becoming an extension of that, and that modeling will, Jason has now started a development of that site along these same principles. So that is like zone 1. Then you go up from there, you need model projects at a neighborhood level, at an enterprise level. You go up from there, you need to start bringing together your local economy, your relocalized economy. So we're working with networks around that. The next level up is your bioregional level. This will be the site, and many of us are intimately involved with planning for a bioregional congress, which will take place here in late August, which I believe you're invited to, are you not?
Right. A permaculture or whatever, broader kind of congress.
It is permaculture in a broad sense of permaculture, meaning permanent culture or sustainable culture. So we're trying to, we've recognized that there are different guilds or facets to this emerging sustainable culture, and we're trying to bring all dimensions of it together so people are more conscious of their place within a whole emerging synthetic culture.
So,
and then from there it's bioregions connecting up. Right. Your journey here is a connecting of bioregions.
That's true. Even though we're from the Shasta bioregion, are we still in the same? The fir trees.
You're a sister bioregion. You've got the oranges down there that will be traded.
Actually, not in my bioregion. My bioregion, well, in the valley.
In the valley.
True. That's true. We have the oranges.
You supply the water for the oranges, maybe.
That's true. We supply the water. We're up in the slopes, so like you, we have
the
fir
watershed.
trees. We're the watershed for the growing region. I want to go back to zones 1, at least 1 or 2. What are you doing here on your site that's part of that model? On the practical level, and Jason, what are you doing on your site that's part of that practical modeling or your neighborhood?
You want to start on your site?
Sure. I mean, just real simply, I mean, transforming the landscape into a perennial, having a lot more perennials, making it an edible landscape that can feed anywhere right now 4 people, but more on an acre of land.
Really?
Working towards this.
Yes.
But I want to speak a little more about the fact that it could be a site for instance, a food cooperative or a food collective where you have drying, canning, teaching workshops on how to prepare food, storage, these kinds of endeavors, growing starts for all the gardens in the neighborhood, for instance. Okay. These are some of the projects evolving on that site. Okay.
We have we're being powered right now by photovoltaic electricity. We've got panels on the roof of this building. We have 2 solar hot water heaters. All our water is kept on site in bioswales. We have bioswales. The rainwater that comes off the roof doesn't go into the drain system but recharges the groundwater. We have a constructed wetlands gray water system. We have radiant floor heat. This building is a straw bale building, makes use of local materials.
So back to the radiant heating for a second. You're getting that heat from solar?
We're getting the heat from solar. Okay. It goes to hot water, it heats water in a hot water heater, then circulates through the tubing of the system.
So your energy use is going to be real low.
Our energy use is real. We have multiple strategies for reducing energy demand, as well as multiple strategies for making use of local energy resources, local water resources, and local organic materials. There's no organic materials that leave this site. They all get recycled back into the system here. And there are multiple strategies for this. So there are materials that are immediately available to all people. We're trying to model how those can be used on site to reduce the demands from larger systems, because we will need to make these adaptations very quickly in the times ahead.
Very quickly in the times ahead. We have about 2 minutes left. Give me your picture, the time. How quickly are we going to have to move?
We are approaching tipping points. And there's so many variables that we cannot say, but our perception is that there's huge instabilities in the world right now. Hurricane Katrina is the metaphor for this. That the hurricane was the proximate cause of the disaster that took place there, but there was layer upon other things that contributed to the human disaster, the ecological disaster that took place. This will happen, this will be writ large upon the planet. And it's hard to say what will trigger it, whether it will be the money system, whether it will be peak oil, whether it will be climate change, whether it will be other earth changes, whether it will be geopolitical tensions, whether it will be some convergence of these in peak events that will then rapidly precipitate a loss of stability in the global system. It is close. Everybody knows it is close.
Everybody who's watching.
Everybody's watching.
That's true.
I also want to reiterate that for the majority of people on this planet, they already lived this reality in many respects. And they've been living it for a long time.
Living the stay within your ecosystem?
No, the reality of collapse, what we call collapse. It's not something that's on the horizon for them. It's something that's an everyday experience.
Yes.
It's through imperialism, through globalization, etc., and colonization that this has been occurring. And I think the great lesson we have to learn is the sheer amount of courage and heart and perseverance that these people have maintained throughout this process. They have lived through it. They have created amazing models. We can look to Cuba, we can look to South America, we can look anywhere, India for instance, and find these models of existence. And for many of these people, they are just biding and waiting for their time when this great weight is lifted off and they can move from just barely persevering and surviving, not just sustaining themselves, but being able to thrive, to have vibrant cultures, to have balanced human development, community development. And we can learn so much from them and look at what they're doing and let them be our teachers at this time.
It will be humbling for empire, will it not?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Carry on. We will be back. We will want to see the models that you're doing in another year. This is Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Thanks for joining us.
There is need for people to have a sense of empowerment. There is need for people to have hope. There is need for people to have vision, new vision, and there is need for a solution-oriented approach. It is not enough to critique the systems that are destroying the vibrant life on this planet. It is more important for us to conceptualize what it is that we want to replace that system with and to bring forward new models that demonstrate this.